Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. And once again, as always, reset the mic. Huh? That's not too bad. What's going on there? Oh, that's a bit high. Hello. There we go. It is Wednesday, the 19th of February at 8:27 p.m. And I guess we're going to talk about how everything is going according to plan, if you know what the plan is. And they're not shy about sharing the details of the plan. I mean, it's everywhere. It's in your Bible, it's in movies, it's in television shows, it's in the news media. And they're not shy. And if you miss any of that, there's some idiot who thinks he's talking to God telling you his version of what it is. And that's usually some pastor or some moronic Catholic priest or something like that. But nonetheless, it is all going according to plan. So let's take a look again at what the plan is. Okay? Because it's very interesting. Now, let's just talk for a moment about some of the geopolitical things going on in the world. Let's pass a word about China. Now, China, in diplomatic circles in most of the 20th century, was referred to as the Hermit Kingdom. And it was called the Hermit Kingdom because China seemed to have no interest in interacting with the world. They were just completely separate. Now, if you think the forces that govern this world were unaware of China, you would be gravely mistaken. It was, in fact, the forces that govern this world that brought China into the fold. And this was accomplished, the first Westerner to go over, not officially given credit for it, but those in the know. No. The first Westerner to go over and talk to Mao Zedong and the Communist Party, and this would have been, well, shortly after the Cultural Revolution, was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, an old friend of China and old friend of Mao's and a diehard communist. And, you know, I used to be afraid of saying the word communist because after I got my liberal education, a journalism degree, and I educated myself, I thought, there's not that much really wrong with communism. It kind of gets a bad rap. And then as you grow, I guess you could say spiritually, in terms of your perception, multidimensionally, you realize that communism is always an excuse for mass murder. So it's when societies kind of go off track and there's nothing left to be done but to kill a bunch of people. And Mao did that. So Trudeau went over to China in, I suspect it was, I want to say like 1970, 1971. And he basically went over there and he said something to the effect of, "Hey Mao, we Westerners, we'd like to know you better. We're not as bad as you think, and we actually share a lot of your values." Something like that. Okay, and remember, Trudeau was at the victory table in Shanghai in '49 when Mao took China and chased the Kuomintang out, who I think the Americans wanted to win the Civil War there. They didn't want to lose China to communism, although I don't know if everybody understood how dangerous communism was back then. I mean, they had seen the Bolshevik Revolution and everything, so it would be hard to be ignorant about it, right? And then the 20th century was really about containing communism, right? We watched in my lifetime. I was born right in the middle of the Cold War. And well, I mean, country after country was gobbled up by Russia and assimilated into the Soviet Union, United Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR. And damn good hockey players. And I don't know how many countries they had at their peak, but it was, I think, over 20. I mean, they had everybody. They had Latvia, Romania, Hungary, Poland, um, Czechoslovakia, Slovakia, what we call Serbia. Yeah, so I mean, Eastern Europe just went for this communism. Now, Eastern Europe, if you don't know, was the home to the Ashkenazi Jews, probably the most troublesome race on the planet, and just in terms of stirring shit up. And so that was mainly their home. And so yeah, communism was always brutal, always violent, and extremely inefficient. I mean, I grew up watching the news and, watching Russian citizens stand in line to get toilet paper. That's how bad it was, right? I mean, nobody met production deadlines because there's no incentive in communism, right? There's no incentive. You see, human beings are a very singular creature, and we come together in very strange ways. And some people are amenable to intense collectivism, and intense collectivism would be communism. Some people are not. I myself prefer to be left alone, but I do like certain collectives, like a good group of friends, family, stuff like this. Um, so, yeah, it's not too bad. Um, so, first guy into China was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Now, the thing you got to understand is that Chinese communism and Russian communism did not get along. Right? Russia and China actually went to war, I think, in the 60s or 70s. I think Russia was a little appalled as well at what was going on in China, like all the death. And so there's no guarantee that communism is going to bring the world together. Now, the next guy to go into China that does get the credit in many circles as being the first guy to engage China and bring China out of its hermit shell is, of course, the late, great Henry Kissinger, who lived to be almost 100 years old and one of the most ghoulish men to walk the earth. And most certainly, probably occupying some region of hell as we speak. And yes, hell exists. Don't listen to what these fucking New Age flakes tell you. Hell exists, okay? Everybody thinks they know stuff, but they don't, okay? I don't know why that is. I guess you could say the same about me, but listen to your heart is all I would say. And test everything I say. But hell exists. The only lie we're told in Christianity and Islam is that it's eternal, and that's a load of shit too. It's a rehabilitation zone, okay? So if you persist as an individual and you have to go through suffering. If your individuality and your identity as a being, and that means your identity as a being moving through life in and out of bodies, if it's maintained, God loves you. And so I look at hell as a remediation zone, like a kind of in between life prison where you go to work off the sins that you committed, and then you're released and you're given another chance. So there's hell, but it's not eternal. And it's not created by your mind. It really exists, okay? It's a dimension. It has agents that govern it. It really exists. And so how the fuck did I end up talking about hell? I don't even remember. Oh yeah, so Kissinger. So Kissinger ends up over in China, and then all of a sudden, this economic relationship begins between the West and China, and it's about 30 years before they're brought into the World Trade Organization. And China's the great mystery, you know. It's always been the great mystery. There's a phenomenal film from the 60s with Steve McQueen called The Sand Pebbles, and it really articulates China well. At that time, China's a completely different place now. It's pretty much just like us now. It's just their governmental system is different. But I bet you that the people feel freer living in China than we do in the West now. And there's reasons for that. Anyways, so, you know, tonight's podcast is Everything is Going According to Plan. And so you have to excuse me. I go on these little tangents, you know, stories inside of stories inside of stories. I really just can't help myself. This is just the way I tell stories. And this is a story style podcast. I'm not going to be referencing any video or anything. These are my favorite ones to do. Now, the one thing we know by Kissinger going over is that China was deliberately, consciously brought into the world for a reason, and that reason has to do with the controllers. Okay? Otherwise, they would have just left them alone. I mean, the English had been over, and, you know, they liked the tea. England got tea from China. And started trading opium for tea, which is kind of a precursor to the fentanyl situation now. And China is one of those people and places that they don't forget anything. Okay? Like culturally, they believe in karma. I can't really speak for the mainland anymore. It's been through so much, but I don't think they've lost their core culture. It would be very difficult to take that away. And so they believe that the West is owed some payback for what the West did to them, I don't know, a couple hundred years ago. 150, 175 years ago. I don't really have an opinion either way. You know, the way I see it is the people who get involved in those drugs are stupid to begin with, whether they're Chinese or North American. I'm not entirely convinced that Trump has a tremendous compassion for drug addicts. You know, I think he's using the fentanyl as a pretext to clamp down on China. Who knows, though? I'm just a guy talking into a microphone on a Wednesday night. I don't know. So China begins to slowly work with the West. And in the beginning, they're given a bunch of shit work, okay? And, you know, it's funny because when you're growing up, until you're about 40 years old, I'd say until you're about 50 years old, you don't really understand time, how it works and how it forms events. Because everything, when you're young, like when you're like 0 to 20, 20 to 30, you know, um, like for example, I just before I started the show, I saw a little meme on Facebook that said that people who were born in 1996 are the same age as George Costanza was when Seinfeld premiered. And I think Seinfeld premiered in like the late 80s or something, okay? So, it's kind of interesting, but when you start to look at the way the planners have been moving through the 20th century, I have to give them their due. Jimmy Jean and Epic and Rio. It is kind of like 10 and 20-year plans. And so they move in such a way that you don't really see anything happening. This is the way these people move. By the way, and this is, remember, there's so many money lines I have on this podcast. And it's good to remember them and understand them because they're money lines, because they're just succinct truths, they're maxims. Okay? There's no such thing as a coincidence. You may have heard of a coincidence, but if you study things closely, you've never really seen one. There's no such thing as a coincidence. So the very same year that America brokers relations with communist China, the World Economic Forum is founded, and this would be 1972. And it's been the same guy since the beginning, Klaus Schwab. Now, Klaus Schwab is 86 now, right? So 72 to 2025, that would be 53 years. So he you got to be kidding me. Yeah, so he was put in as the head of the WEF at the age of 33. Now, Klaus Schwab has been an insider since day one. Okay, and it's time to just sort of start, tying all this stuff together. Okay, these are the ritualists, by the way. If you for a moment do not believe that Henry Kissinger attended sacrifice rituals and death orgies and all the insane shit that these people are into, insane from our perspective, there's a certain logic and rationale to it if you're a practitioner and you're dealing with those, I don't want to say deities, let's say those agencies, and they're mostly alien. Whether they believe they're dealing with Lucifer or not, they're mainly dealing with aliens. And so there's absolutely, we cannot kid ourselves that that's a coincidence, okay? So you get China brought in and you get the WEF formed. And all of it about 55 years ago. So 1972 to 2025 is that's 53 years. Is it? Yeah, 72 would be 28 years left in the 20th century, plus 25 is 53. 53 years. And that's how long China has been interacting with the West. Basically my lifetime. I'm 58. Okay? So this is another thing too, is that like I'm like at the beginning of Gen X. Gen X begins the year I was born, which is 66. Technically, my brother is a late baby boomer at 65, born in 65. And there's, however trivial these things may seem, there is a kind of psychic barometer to the way the generations are working, because I believe it has to do with the souls that are born. And my brother is so different from me, we may as well be from different families. And we're only born 13 months apart, raised on the same food, the same activities, the same parents, everything. And what's even more curious than that is that all of my brother's friends, and I'm going to turn off the studio light there, I don't need it. All of my brother's friends and all of the people in his year of high school, they're all the same. There's no rebels really. And then everybody in my year, which is only 1 year later, were completely different for the most part. Completely different, like much more rebellious, much more not willing to go along with the system. And I can't help but notice that. And all of us born east end of Ottawa, all of us born in the Ottawa General Hospital, 1 year apart. And it's so different. It's unbelievable. So there is something to the astrology and all of this stuff that people love to get into, because it's fascinating. Let's be honest. So Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, and China. So when you think and you understand things in a spiritual way, and you don't believe in coincidences, you ask yourself, and by the way, they don't believe in coincidences either. So if you think I'm some fruitcake and, running around the world seeing signs and signals where they don't exist, well, I can tell you that the way I perceive reality is much closer to the way they perceive reality. And they're controlling our reality, so I'd say I'm probably right. So you get the WEF and you get China brought in. And it's a very curious thing that they've done with China, you know? I can't quite get this thing. Let me just give it a few good hauls here. Got my hair cut. You probably can see that. So China starts getting all of this, what I would call chump change work, shitty little factory work. But these controllers, they know something about everybody. They know something about everybody the way the rabbis think they know something about everybody. And it has to do with their version of what happened after the flood. Ice Age for some, flood for others. But after the world was sort of rebooted, and they say only Noah lived, but that's a bunch of horseshit. If that were true, there'd be no, tales of Gilgamesh. And so the question then becomes, and the worthy point of contemplation is, what is the relationship between the way the world is going and China? Okay, so what did China do? Okay, well, China dramatically changed the global economic landscape. And what China mainly did was they started to take away all of the manufacturing from the West. And I mean most of the West. It's not just an American phenomenon. It's Canadian, it's Western European, it's Scandinavian. So let's do a little test here. Can you think of a single Western manufacturing success story in the last 50 years? Okay. Well, You know, and I know the only one that comes to mind for me is it's IKEA out of Sweden. That dude learned how to build furniture a certain way, sell it at a cheap price, make it so that it could be assembled at home, ship it in boxes, got into everything, hired a lot of designers. They came up with some good designs. People like it. And I mean, everything's fabricated, right? It's all pressboard and laminate. And I mean, over here, everything I have is real hardwood. In many ways, I live more richly than you should see the desk I'm on right now. It's one piece of wood that's about 6 inches thick and about a little bit more than a meter long. Takes two people to lift it. It's like a couple £100. I went to a sawmill and got it. Just the piece of wood. Like it's not even a desk. It's just a slab of wood. Just the slab of wood is worth, I think, about $400 or $500. Over here in North America, it would probably be worth 2,000. And then we put earth bags, and then we wrap them in plastic mesh, and then we covered the mesh with a mix of concrete and lime. And it's just this beautiful desk. I mean, it looks like it's out of the Flintstones TV show. But it's not something you could do in the West because the material would be too expensive. So IKEA, they went and they had this manufacturing success story, right? But I can't think of too many others. And where there are manufacturing success stories, and there are design success stories in the West. Like, for example, the design, and there are marketing success stories in the West. Okay, so the design and marketing of Air Jordans. You know, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck just did a movie about it together, about the two guys at Nike who convinced the CEO, I think his name's Knight with a K. Oh, actually, Ben Affleck plays the head of Nike, and Matt Damon plays the salesman or the marketing guy who comes up with the Jordan campaign. And they found Jordan before he even went into the NBA. He was like they could see right away that he was like to basketball what Wayne Gretzky was to hockey. And they signed him up and they gave him this killer deal. But where were those shoes manufactured? Well, China, Philippines, Malaysia. That's where all the factory work is done now. Okay? And that's really why I think as I contemplate it out loud, and I'm literally thinking aloud more than I'm doing a podcast. That's why they brought China in, so that they could have this very cheap manufacturing. And when China started in this economic alliance with the West, I mean, manufacturing costs ended up being pennies on the dollar, like not even over a dime, not even 10% of what it would cost to pay labor and manufacture those shoes in the United States. It's really kind of amazing. And just like the fights I used to have with my old man about free trade, some 20 years later in the early 90s after China came in, the question becomes, well, what happens to those people who get laid off from the factory work, right? Now, I grew up with factory workers. I didn't really meet them till I moved to Toronto, right? But kids raised in factory towns. So in my late 20s, I got a group of friends that they were all from one small town called St. Thomas, Ontario. Strange little town, actually. About 35,000 people, but Joe Thornton, the former captain of the Boston Bruins, comes from St. Thomas, and Ryan Gosling, the actor, comes from St. Thomas. And Justin Bieber comes from a little town about 30 minutes away from there. And if you know my part of the world, it's the weirdest place for these big time personalities to come from. These personalities that go out onto the world stage, because these are tiny little towns, right? Justin Bieber I think he's from Stratford, Ontario, and they're best known for the Stratford Festival. They put on a Shakespeare festival every year, and all kinds of theater goers stay in beds and breakfasts. The Toronto crowd used to go there in the 80s and 90s for the Stratford Festival. This is, of course, back when we had culture. We don't even have culture anymore. I mean, I don't think you could run a Shakespeare festival anymore. I'm not going to stop the podcast to look up if the Stratford Festival is still going on, but I just in passing, because I can't help but say these things out loud as they pass through my mind, my consciousness while I'm doing the podcast. We have lost so much culture, it's unbelievable. And this is part of the march toward the machine man. So all this and so the kids I knew, the young men I knew in their late 20s, I met them all in my late 20s, early 30s. They were all raised middle class, like, cottages. Middle class is you live in a nice house, you have a roof over your head, a backyard, you have a dog. It's middle class. You have a home. Your parents work, or one of your parents works. And you can have a cottage, a fishing boat, some skidoos, some toys. And St. Thomas was mainly a Ford town. I think they did the F-150, actually. And they shut down the Ford plant about 15, 20 years ago, and everybody got laid off. And not quite sure what St. Thomas does now. It's surviving, but, I'm not quite sure what they do now. But manufacturing was a part of our culture. And all of you the same age as me, maybe your parents worked in a manufacturing plant, I noticed recently that President Trump is in a beef with Harley Davidson because they're making most of their motorcycles outside of the United States now. And I mean, the question becomes, did the cost of labor get so high that these companies could not make a profit? I don't think so. Making a profit means that if you're the CEO and you're in the 80s, your high-end employees, the design engineers and the people who run the assembly line, meaning the maintenance to the assembly line itself, which is partially robotic and automated, and then your assembly line people and everything, your high-end people would be making $100,000 and $120,000 a year, and this is in 1985, and that would be with a little bit of overtime. And that was really good money. I mean, back then that was lawyer money, That was, doctors made a bit more, in the mid 80s, a doctor. I dated a girl for a few years, and both of her parents were psychiatrists, and each of them made about $250,000 a year. So they had a half million Canadian coming in a year in the mid 80s. When the Canadian dollar was the same as the US. But they were very successful. They were booked all day, every day. They'd been in practice for a few decades. Yeah, back, sorry. Had to go get a candle lit. A lot of stuff just disappears up here. I swear to God, something's taking it. I'm not joking. Everybody notices it. Like, you go to the store, you buy 3 lighters, 2 disappear. And there's no rational explanation for it. Anyways, what I'm getting at is manufacturing used to be a big part of our economy, and now it isn't. And that manufacturing went somewhere. And it went where these global economic forces sent it. And it was all set up, it was all established, and it was all done by people that In hindsight, they're not very trustworthy, are they? Pierre Elliott Trudeau, child rapist and murderer, according to Annika Lucas. And believe me when I tell you, I believe her. She's a well-known figure in Belgium, where Corinne Hustebot works. And Belgium is one of the hot spots for this. Let's just call it satanic culture. I don't want to keep repeating myself. As is France, by the way. The French are up to their necks in this shit, okay? And it follows with the Catholic Church, right? Because, anyways. So you got Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Henry Kissinger, who was just, I mean, let's just call, he was a mass murderer. And he liked it. Just like Madeleine Albright. They like killing hundreds of thousands of people. They like it. Okay? They have a very demonic consciousness. That is the consciousness of the demons. And because that's their job, by the way, is to punish people. Now, as to whether Madeleine Albright and Henry Kissinger are working for the demons and the demonic forces, if you want to look at theology as a series of interlinked cosmologies, then it's entirely possible, yes. Okay? Now, it's one way of looking at the Jews. But they just love killing people. So these are the people who have brought us to the point we're at now. And, so it is a very difficult time to be in. And that's not what I mean to say. What I'm saying is everything that's happening now is by design, okay? And it includes Trump, okay? And I'm leading up to it because it's, everything is going according to plan. And one of the main ways that they get away with this is, well, number one, ever since they invented television, people haven't thought right. Okay, people have not thought right. Television is it's like the inverse of meditation. It collapses consciousness. It gives you more information and it entertains you. And it's very curious to me that, the goal of a human being is to move their consciousness into more dimensions where we start in 3D. We're born into a three-dimensional world, the planet Earth. And our consciousness is supposed to grow into other dimensions, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh. And, at this great technological turning in our world, we're operating with about 2 dimensions because everything is 2 dimensions now, whether it's a computer screen or a cell phone or a television screen. Everything is 2 dimensions now. They're very curious the way this whole thing is working. And that's by design too. Everything that is happening is by design. Okay? I don't know how I could make this known to you. Hopefully I have credit and you believe what I'm telling you. But for those who require a little bit of proof, you have to realize that most of the technology, I think that I won't go into the radio because I can't really speak for Marconi or any of that stuff or the telephone. But, if you look at like just where it begins with, let's say digital television, which begins around the 90s, that's all DARPA technology. Defense Advanced Research Program of America. That's all DARPA. The internet is DARPA. Okay? And what that means is that this technology is known and studied. It's studied for decades before it's released into the public. The scientific world is generally at the defense level and at the classified level The scientific world is always at least 50 years ahead of what we have in front of us now. Okay, now that's a very interesting thing, because if we look at the lifespan of Klaus Schwab at the WEF and China's engagement with the West in 1972, both events happening in 1972, at a prototype level, they had all the technology we're using now back then. If my analogy is correct, and believe me, I think it is. Okay? So they knew how we would be thinking and how we would be reacting to the technology we're using 50 years ago. Okay? It's really kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. So the way that our societies unfold is not as random as they market it. Now, they always market it a certain way. Boy genius, Bill Gates. Boy genius, Steve Jobs. Okay? And none of those things are true. If you scratch the surface just a little bit, you will find intelligence connections to these people. You can definitely find it in Bill Gates's family. And all the pieces start to come together. Okay? So let's flash forward to where we are now. Where we are now with Donald Trump and everything that's going on now. So we know what they want. They want a World Economic Forum. Okay? They want the world run the way Klaus Schwab and Yuval Noah Harari want the world run. Couple Jews, by the way. And Kissinger's Jewish. And it's not so much Jewish, I should stop saying that. It's this insider religion, which we'll call Satanism, even though it has little or nothing to do with Satan. Okay? But let's just call it Satanism. This is the real religion. This is the religion they all belong to. Pierre Elliott Trudeau belonged to it. You wouldn't be meeting Annika Lucas in a hotel room at a Bilderberger meeting in 1972, a 9-year-old girl being offered to you by David Rockefeller, if you weren't inside. Okay? And a lot of the people coming out now and giving information, they are controlled opposition. Don't kid yourself. And that everybody should be taken with a grain of salt, including Max Spears, Michael Aquino, like even David Icke. Okay? It should all be taken with a grain of salt. But what they all do is they all create fascinating rabbit holes that do what? Well, they consume massive amounts of time and energy. Okay? Now, why would you want somebody being consumed or distracted? So you don't see what they're really doing. That's the only reason I can come up with. I mean, that's what they tell you in magic as well. The magician gets you to look at his left hand where his right hand is doing the magical part of the magic trick that they don't want you to know about. And that's an aspect of the magic that they use as well, at least as it pertains to the engagement of the general public, okay? So we come to where we are now, and it's a fascinating time because we get this guy, Donald John Trump, a New York real estate guy, who is undoubtedly I'm going to just say this, okay? With the exception of maybe Jimmy Carter, let's say since Carter, okay? He's probably the most human person to occupy the White House. What do I mean by that? Well, I don't think he's a member of this religion. I don't think that he's a ritualist. I think he's met them all. I think he knows them all. I think he's the ultimate insider. And I think he's like, from their perspective, he's a rat. And that's why they're afraid of him, right? He's a rat, and that's why they disrespect him so much, because he was told things, he broke oath. You know, maybe he never took an oath, but in those worlds, if you're told something and you go on to use it against the people who told you, you're just like a criminal organization, you're considered a rat, okay? And that's how they see Donald Trump, is as a rat. Now, what is Trump really doing? Okay? Now, here's where it gets interesting, and there's no doubt I'm going to have to do a redo on this, a redux, okay? Everything is going according to plan. Redo, redux, will be tomorrow night. But I'll end here tonight. So this is the Antichrist narrative. This is the religious narrative they're going with. Everybody was going on and on and on and on about a false alien invasion and all this bullshit. But at the end of the day, they're going with the religious narrative. That's the plan they think has the highest probability of working, okay? And what that means is they have to bring the Antichrist about. And the Antichrist will be a highly charged individual, okay? And a person capable of doing things that seem miraculous. And in terms of the laws of physics, they may very well be miraculous. They may very well violate the laws of physics. But the energy of the Antichrist doesn't come from God. So where does the Antichrist get its energy? Because you need a lot of energy to do miracles, okay? You need access to higher levels of energy, the consciousness, okay? So if you can't connect to source and you're not doing things according to how God wants them done, then how do you do miracles? How do you do what the yogis do in the Himalayas? How do you do that? Well, you find another energy source. And what other energy source would suffice? If you can't tap into source itself, what other energy force would suffice? Well, the collective consciousness of millions or billions of people, all looking at you adoringly and giving you energy. And that energy doesn't have to necessarily all be love. The hate, even if those of you who hate Donald Trump realize you're giving him as much energy as those who adore him. Okay? Now, because the Antichrist has to harvest all this energy, and it has to be a pure energy. It has to be a pure heart energy. It can't be this dark, dirty energy they get from the rituals. It has to be drawn from a human population that consensually gives it. So what set of circumstances would allow that to happen? Well, start revealing all the lower aspects of the cult. Start exposing the people. Start publishing lists. Start arresting people. Maybe even killing them for treason or high crimes against humanity. I mean, when people learn what some of these people have been up to, they're going to want them killed. There's no prison sentence for a person who turns on the human race and ritually harvests children for amusement and for occult benefit. There's no place for... How do you remediate someone like that? How do you do that in our penal system? Now, what do you do with all the people who have slowly become aware of what's going on, largely due to the technology they leaked into the public, they gave to the public, called the internet. So all the conditions for us to get this information have come about from technology circles governed by the controlling power that's completely aware of, if not participating in these cults and underground movements. You see? So are we exactly where they want us in the timeline? Or have we victoriously arrived here? And then you get all these new age narratives coming in, talking about, photons coming from the Pleiadians because of where our solar system is in the Milky Way galaxy. I mean, there's a bit of truth to that, but that doesn't answer everything at all. This is an old world narrative. This is a biblical narrative. So all of this energy is being harvested up now. Have you ever seen a leader receiving the kind of adoration that Trump is receiving? Yeah, it's true, some people hate them, but as I said, they hate him as vociferously as the people who love him. And so he's harvesting up all this energy, harvesting it up, cleaning up the world. He seems like a godly man. But from the perspective of the plan, he's their Judas. Okay, so the Christ had a Judas. The Antichrist is Judas in a sense, right? It would be a Judas. And he's turning on them, but it's all part of the script. Okay? Now, they may not tell the initiates all this stuff when they blood in. Oh yeah, okay, you're going to have a great life, you're going to be a multimillionaire, but somewhere in the early 21st century, we're going to sacrifice about a quarter to a third of our ritual population to appease the public and think that we're going good. Maybe they're all told that, and they just take their lottery chance that they're going to be in the 2/3 that survive. Or maybe they're capable of making the sacrifice because dark religion requires as much sacrifice as light-based religion. Did you ever consider that? Okay. But I can tell you one thing for sure. Everything is going to plan. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.